Millions of people over the age of 60, people living normal lives, eating familiar foods, following routines they have had for decades, are quietly developing arterial damage that is almost entirely preventable. The most alarming part is not the condition itself, it is what is causing it. And for most people in this age group, the source is something they reach for every single day, something sitting right now on their kitchen counter or in their pantry cabinet, something they were told for years was the healthy choice. This is not a distant problem. It is happening in kitchens across the country, right now, at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, in homes where people are genuinely trying to take care of themselves. Many people are experiencing the effects without any obvious symptoms. The arteries narrow slowly, the inflammation builds quietly, and because nothing hurts, nothing rings an alarm. If you are over 60 or love someone who is, what follows in this video may be the most important health information you hear this year. I'm Dr. Albert Winslow, and I'm going to show you what is happening, why it matters, and exactly what you can do. And you are far from the only one dealing with this. The scale of what we are talking about today is genuinely difficult to absorb, but it is important that you understand it, not to frighten you, but because the size of this problem is the very reason it has stayed hidden for so long. When something is this common, it stops looking like a problem. It starts looking like normal aging. That is one of the most dangerous things that can happen in public health, and it is exactly what has happened with cooking oil. According to the American Heart Association, cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death among adults over 65. Not cancer, not accidents. Heart disease, the kind driven significantly by what happens inside the arteries over years and decades. And when researchers began examining which dietary factors were most consistently associated with accelerating that arterial damage in older adults, cooking oil kept appearing in the data. Not occasionally, consistently. The three oils we are going to discuss today, partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, refined corn oil, and refined sunflower oil, have something in common that most people do not know. And that shared characteristic is what makes them specifically damaging to the cardiovascular system in ways that compound as we age. Many people who grew up in the era when vegetable oils were aggressively marketed as heart-healthy alternatives to animal fats never questioned them. Why would they? The messaging was everywhere. Doctors endorsed it, nutritional labels celebrated it. The entire food industry shifted around it. And so a generation of Americans settled into cooking habits built on a foundation that has since been significantly revised by science. The problem is that the revision never reached the kitchen. Public health data consistently shows that adults over 60 are among the least likely age groups to have updated their dietary fat habits in response to newer research. Not because they are resistant to change, but because the information never arrived with the same force as the original marketing. That asymmetry between what the research now says and what this age group was told and continues to believe is at the core of what we are addressing today. And what this means for people at this stage of life, specifically, changes everything we need to discuss next. The pattern here is consistent across millions of people, which is exactly why this matters, and exactly why understanding it at a population level gives us the clearest picture of what is actually happening. When health organizations began reviewing dietary data from large cohorts of adults over 60, a specific pattern emerged around the consumption of highly refined and partially hydrogenated plant-based oils. These are not marginal ingredients. They are among the most widely consumed cooking fats in the American household. And for this generation, they have been a kitchen staple for 50 or 60 years. The first oil, partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, is the one that introduced trans fats into the food supply on a massive scale beginning in the mid-20th century. Even in small residual amounts, trans fats have been shown in peer-reviewed research published through the National Institutes of Health to raise LDL cholesterol, the kind that builds up in arterial walls, while simultaneously lowering HDL cholesterol, the protective kind. That double mechanism is what makes them so damaging. It does not just push in one bad direction. It pushes in two bad directions at the same time. The second oil, refined corn oil, sits in a category that looks healthier on the label than it is in the body. It is high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, which, in moderate amounts, are not harmful. But when consumed at the levels typical of American cooking, and without adequate omega-3 fatty acids to balance them, they create a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation throughout the body. That inflammation does not announce itself dramatically. It works slowly, quietly, in the walls of blood vessels, in the lining of arteries, in the heart tissue itself. The third oil, refined sunflower oil, has a similar omega-6 imbalance problem and adds another layer of concern. At the high temperatures commonly used in stovetop cooking, refined sunflower oil breaks down and produces oxidation byproducts that research has linked to endothelial damage to the delicate inner lining of blood vessels. Think about how many times in a week a pan of oil heats up in a home kitchen. Multiply that across 50 years of cooking. The cumulative exposure is significant. The pattern does not stop there. There is a second layer to this that affects this age group even more directly. When health professionals began tracking this across different communities of older adults, one finding kept surfacing with remarkable consistency. The adults most affected were not those making careless health choices. They were people who were actively trying to be healthy. They were reading labels. They were avoiding butter. They were choosing oils marketed as light or pure or heart smart. And yet their cardiovascular markers were telling a different story. This is why your age group is specifically at risk in a way that younger generations may not be. First, your arteries have had more time. The damage from these oils is cumulative and progressive. A person in their 30s cooking with refined corn oil for a few years carries a very different risk profile than a person in their 60s who has been doing it for 4 decades. The arterial stiffness, the plaque accumulation, the endothelial inflammation, these are processes that build over long time horizons. By the time you reach your 60s or 70s, the oil choices of your 40s and 50s are expressing themselves in your cardiovascular system right now. Second, the aging cardiovascular system processes oxidative stress differently. Research published through the National Institute on Aging confirms that as we get older, our cells become less efficient at neutralizing free radicals, the unstable molecules generated in large numbers when refined oils are heated. That means the same pan of hot sunflower oil that might cause modest oxidative stress in a younger body causes significantly more in yours. Third, many adults over 60 are managing other conditions simultaneously: blood pressure concerns, blood sugar regulation, inflammation. And the oils we are discussing today interact with all of those conditions in ways that compound the risk rather than stay contained to cardiovascular health alone. For a generation that was told this was simply the healthy choice, that replacing butter with vegetable oil was a clear win, the reality is a genuinely difficult adjustment. And what the data shows about how many people in this age group are still cooking with these 3 oils daily makes what comes next important for everyone watching. What the community-level data shows next is where the real opportunity for change becomes clear. But first, we need to address what is missing from awareness, because this gap is significant, and it is not your fault it exists. Among the adults most at risk, the vast majority do not know that the regulatory designation for cooking oils in the United States does not require disclosure of the oxidation stability of those oils, meaning a bottle of refined sunflower oil can sit on a shelf and be sold as healthy without any label requirement to disclose that it produces harmful byproducts at normal cooking temperatures. That is a structural gap in consumer information that disproportionately affects older adults who cook more frequently at home and are more dependent on label guidance when making food choices. There is also a widespread misunderstanding about what the phrase high in polyunsaturated fats actually means in practice. For decades, the public health message simplified fat into 2 categories: saturated, which was bad, and unsaturated, which was good. That message was not wrong in its general direction, but it was dramatically oversimplified in ways that left out critical detail. Not all polyunsaturated fats behave the same way in the body. Not all of them behave the same way under heat. And the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, something that almost no consumer-facing nutritional communication ever addressed, turns out to be one of the most important variables in managing systemic inflammation, particularly as we age. Public health researchers estimate that the typical American diet now delivers an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of somewhere between 15:1 and 20:1. The ratio associated with reduced inflammation and cardiovascular protection in the research literature is closer to 4:1. That gap, driven significantly by the widespread use of refined corn and sunflower oil in home cooking, is something millions of people over 60 are living inside of right now, without knowing it, without any symptom telling them it is happening. What the population-level data shows about people who close that gap and how quickly the body responds when they do is what changes the picture for this age group entirely. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know, how many people in your life, family members, close friends, neighbors, do you think are cooking with these oils right now without knowing any of this? Give me a number in the comments, even a rough estimate, because those numbers, added together from everyone watching, tell us something important about how wide this really goes. Now, here is what people are doing that actually works, and the reason I want to share this at a population level is that the results are remarkably consistent. When adults over 60 systematically replace the 3 oils we discussed with 2 primary alternatives, extra virgin olive oil for lower heat cooking and cold applications, and avocado oil for higher heat cooking, the changes in cardiovascular markers can appear within weeks, not years. The American Heart Association's research on Mediterranean dietary patterns, which center on olive oil as the primary cooking fat, shows consistent associations with reduced arterial inflammation, improved cholesterol ratios, and lower rates of cardiovascular events across populations of older adults. Extra virgin olive oil specifically, not light olive oil, not refined olive oil, but extra virgin, contains oleocanthal, a natural compound with anti-inflammatory properties comparable in mechanism, according to some research teams, to low doses of ibuprofen. It also contains oleic acid, a monounsaturated fat that does not carry the omega-6 imbalance problem of corn or sunflower oil and remains relatively stable under moderate cooking heat. Avocado oil, for higher heat cooking, has one of the highest smoke points of any natural cooking oil, around 520 degrees Fahrenheit in its refined form, and a fatty acid profile that researchers have linked to improved LDL particle size, which matters because smaller, denser LDL particles are more associated with arterial damage than larger, more buoyant ones. Among the adults studied who made this specific substitution, replacing refined corn and sunflower oil with avocado oil for high heat cooking, results showed measurable improvements in oxidative stress markers within 8 to 12 weeks. These are not fringe findings from small studies. They are patterns replicated across populations and reviewed by major health institutions. What you can do starting tomorrow, specifically, practically, and without disrupting the rhythms of how you live and cook, is where this conversation becomes most useful. What works at the population level becomes what works for you personally when you translate it into the specific rhythms of your kitchen. And for this generation, people who have cooked a certain way for most of their adult lives, the goal is not to make cooking feel foreign or complicated. It is to make a small number of targeted swaps that produce real, measurable results without dismantling the comfort and familiarity of the meals you love. Here is how to approach this practically. First, do a simple kitchen audit. Open your pantry and your cabinets. Look at the cooking oils you currently have. If you see refined corn oil, refined sunflower oil, or any oil that lists partially hydrogenated anything on the label, those are your priority replacements. You do not need to throw them out dramatically. You simply do not repurchase them when they run out, and you bring in the alternatives in the meantime. Second, keep 2 oils in your kitchen from this point forward. A bottle of extra virgin olive oil for salad dressings, low heat sautéing, finishing dishes, and anything that does not involve very high heat, and a bottle of avocado oil for anything that requires a hot pan, searing, frying, roasting at high oven temperatures. This 2-bottle system removes decision fatigue and covers the full range of how most people actually cook. Third, read labels on packaged foods. Many processed snacks, crackers, baked goods, and frozen items are still made with the oils we discussed today because they are cheap and shelf-stable. You cannot control every ingredient in every product you buy, but you can move toward a pattern where your primary cooking fat at home is working for your cardiovascular system rather than against it. Fourth, consider increasing omega-3 intake alongside this change, through fatty fish like salmon and sardines, through walnuts, through flax flaxseed because the swap alone improves the ratio, but adding omega-3 sources accelerates the benefit. Public health data consistently shows that people who make both changes simultaneously see faster and more pronounced improvements in inflammatory markers than those who address only one side of the equation. The pattern here, across millions of people who have made these adjustments, is consistent. Small, targeted, sustainable change in how you cook produces measurable cardiovascular benefit. And that benefit compounds over time, just as the damage did. But now it is working in your favor. Together, through this video, you have just built an understanding that most people in your neighborhood, your social circle, and your family do not yet have. You came in knowing what you cook with. You leave knowing what it does inside your body, why your age group is specifically affected, and what you can do starting this week with 2 bottles of oil and a simple change to a habit you have had for decades. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of knowledge that changes health outcomes, not just for individuals, but for the people around them. Because real understanding, shared in real relationships, is how community health actually shifts. You are now equipped with something real, and real knowledge shared with real people creates real change. Think about who in your life needs this information today. A spouse who does the cooking, a sibling managing blood pressure, a neighbor who mentioned a recent cardiac scare, a friend who is trying to eat better but does not know where to start. This is where they can start. I want this community of people, everyone who watches this channel, to genuinely thrive, not just individually, together. Because the health challenges this generation faces are real, and the information gap that makes them worse is something we can actually close. One conversation at a time, one kitchen at a time. Share this video with someone in your community today. Leave your number in the comments. How many people in your life do you think are using these oils right now? And stay with us, because every video we make is built for exactly you, for this stage of life, for the questions you are asking, and for the health you still have every reason to protect.